Good morning. Today is session 10, and we're hoping to get a good file of session 9 on YouTube, but I screwed up last week and we didn't have enough memory left on the memory card, so we only got part of that. So I think I'm going to have to re-record session 9. So this one will go on YouTube. With thanks to Kevin Hawkins. This will be session 10, so it'll say Gospel of Luke 10, and the one before it is not there. Gospel of Luke 9 is not there yet, but hopefully we will get going on that shortly. Our next class after this will be called the First Letter to the Thessalonians, the Early Paul, and that will begin on the Sunday after Labor Day. I'm hoping that we can have some big shindig on the Sunday after Labor Day. And we kind of don't know whether we can. We're hoping that something like that can happen, but the issue is the virus and all. So the vestry and members of the vestry are working on that, so we'll see what we can do. So I've left the Sunday immediately after Labor Day open for that reason. And then, so this will be the Sunday after Labor Day, and it will last for 6 weeks. And I am the author of an article called The Rhetoric of First Thessalonians. And so we're going to, it was published in Belgium in 1990, and so I'm going to get copies of that article made for you to read, and so you can either agree or partially agree or throw rotten tomatoes at it. And in that, you will see that I'm applying Greco-Roman rhetoric to 1 Thessalonians and argue that Paul was doing rhetoric in a particular way. And so you'll hear more than you ever wanted to hear about what is known now as rhetorical criticism. And that will last for 6 weeks. That will last, I believe, through the end of October. And then we'll have to reconsider what we want to do. Because the Sunday before Thanksgiving, I'll be in San Antonio at the Society of Biblical Literature annual meeting. God willing, it is going to be an in-person meeting in San Antonio. We are planning on it. And then we also have an Anglican meeting of biblical scholars, the Anglican Association of Biblical Scholars. And we've been meeting for 20 years or more. Since the early 90s. And so we meet on the Friday before, the Sunday before Thanksgiving. So we're working on that. And so it's a great thing to go to the meeting and see my friends from graduate school and to see my fellow Anglican biblical scholars, most of which are in the United States, some from Canada, some from the UK. I hope we'll have some people from the Caribbean. We sometimes have people from Australia and South Africa. And recently, we had an online meeting of the Society of the Anglican Association of Biblical Scholars, and we were addressed by an Anglican scholar in Hong Kong. And this year at our meeting, we are going to have a meeting about teaching in context, and we're going to talk about local training programs for the training of clergy, in which many of us are engaged. So we're going to talk about that on the Friday before Thanksgiving, hopefully. So if you look at the schedule, what's left of it, namely today, you'll see that we have the Passion narrative and the resurrection. Okay? Okay, let us talk about the Passion narrative. Much has been written and said about the Passion narrative in the Gospels. For many years, it was believed to have been composed separately, or especially Mark's Passion narrative. Of course, Matthew and Luke's Passion narrative is based on Mark's Passion narrative. And for many years, it was thought to have been, Mark's Passion narrative was thought to have been composed separately and perhaps have circulated separately in the early church. And the reason for that is, in Mark, frequently what's going on is things are sort of summarized And then when you get to the Passion narrative, the pace slows down massively, you see. And so a lot of people believe that the Passion narrative was composed or collected, compiled, whatever, as an earlier thing that Mark, the final editor of Mark, included in his gospel. I believe that. The gospel according to Mark has been characterized very famously by Martin Keller as, quote, a passion narrative with an extended introduction. And this characterization responds to the relative absence of extensive teaching material in Mark. You know, we hear Jesus preaching and teaching, and usually it's in parables, and it's usually about the kingdom of God in Mark. But, what are these parables about seeds? Did Jesus just tell a bunch of parables about seeds all the time? What exactly is the, big banana content of the teaching of Jesus? You won't find it in Mark. You do find it in Matthew and to a large extent Luke. So, if you read in Mark 1:15, he went around and he preached concerning, he was preaching the good news of the kingdom of God. That seems to be a summary statement in Mark of what Jesus was preaching. But we don't really have the content in big time in Mark. Matthew and Luke, in their Gospels, they remedy that, or so they see, or as that is how they see it. The Passion narrative in Mark 14 and 15, upon which Luke is based, does focus on the innocence of Jesus because of the unjust nature of the so-called trial of Jesus. If you want to call it a trial, you can, but it's a really lousy trial. You see it in Mark 15, 2 through 5. You see it in, 5 verses in Matthew 27, 4 verses in Luke 23. And the thing that bugs me, and I would think it would bug anybody who teaches law or anybody who is interested in Roman history, it portrays the Roman governor of Judea as essentially taking orders from the crowd in Judea, a conquered people that he's supposed to be in charge of. He's taking orders from the crowd as to whom to release and whom to condemn after he has publicly declared Jesus to have been innocent. Okay? You have to decide whether you think that is historical or not. I have problems with that being historical. Here, the Passion narrative, of course, what you think about the Passion narrative probably is bound up with how you read the miracle stories. I read the miracle stories Christologically. Namely, I want to try to understand what the writer, editor, compiler of the Gospels is saying to the reader about who Christ was and what Christ did during his earthly life. I want to know if he was Son of God, I believe he was, what does that mean? And what was he able to do during his earthly life? And in other words, the miracle stories show Jesus having compassion on people who need healing, and it shows Jesus healing these people. And so what I want to know is, if I can understand it, I want to try to understand what the writer of Mark or Luke or Matthew or John is trying to persuade the original readers of those Gospels to believe or to do. In other words, I'm interested in the rhetoric of the Gospels. And I ask the same question of the Passion narratives. What I want to know is this: what was the writer, editor, compiler, whatever, of the Passion narrative that I'm reading? What is that person trying to say to the original readers about Jesus? What does it mean that Jesus, quite unjustly, was put to death, a death he did not deserve? What does it say about Jesus probably knowing, that he was in big, big danger? What does it mean that he, of his own accord, went to Jerusalem knowing that he was in mortal danger? What does it mean that Jesus prays in the Garden of Gethsemane and saying, Father, would you take this cup away from me, please? But nonetheless, not your will, not my will, but your will be done. So in other words, what does it mean that Jesus, of his own accord, went to Jerusalem for the only time during his adult life, contra the Gospel of John, the only time during his adult life, and that he voluntarily did so to lay down his life for us, and that he predicted his passion, his suffering and death, and resurrection 3 times in Mark 8, Mark 9, and Mark 10, with the parallels in Matthew. So that's what is in the Passion narrative. And so what I want to try to understand, if I can, is what are these writers, editors, compilers trying to convey to me, the reader, or their original readers about Jesus? Okay? Now, let's take a look briefly at the Passion narrative. Danny, would you read that? Luke 22, 39 to 46. And read it quickly.
He came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. When he reached the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not come into the time of trial." Then he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, knelt down, and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done."
Okay, Jesus in all the Gospels, including Mark, including John, Matthew, and Luke, Jesus is omniscient. He knows what's going on. He knows that he's going to be arrested. He knows, if the Gospels are correct, he knows what his fate will be when he is arrested. Jesus' humanity comes to the fore in verses 41 and 42, where Jesus asks that this cup would be removed from him. He uses the divine passive, meaning God the Father. And it's not hard to see what Jesus did in these 2 verses. You could immediately apply that to any of us as Christians, any human being who is experiencing temptation. Jesus was tempted as we are, and yet did not sin, as the prayer book says. So then after that, Jesus is arrested. We know that Judas betrays Jesus. In Matthew and in Mark, Judas actually kisses Jesus, and in Matthew, but in Luke 22, 47 and 48, Judas does not actually kiss Jesus because Jesus won't have it. And then in Mark 14, 47, the high priest's slave's ear is cut off. This is also true in Luke 22:50, but in Luke alone, Jesus heals the ear of the high priest's slave. We learn in John that the high priest's slave was named Malchus, but we don't know that in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So then Jesus pointed out in Mark is that, well, why are you trying to arrest me here with swords and clubs? Because I was in the temple each day teaching when it was public. But the chief priests and the officers of the temple and the elders did not seize him then. In other words, they wanted to seize him in private because they were afraid of the crowds. This is part of the rhetoric against those Jewish leaders. And then Jesus is taken to the high priest's house, and then various people come to the high priest's house. He is questioned by the whole Synedrion, which is the Sanhedrin, but in Greek it's Synedrion, gathered. Sometimes it's translated council. In the NRSV it's translated council, or in the RSV. So in Mark 14, 55 to 61a, there are false witnesses that testify against Jesus, and they don't agree. And Jesus responds by not responding. And Luke edits that out. Luke also edits out the thing where Jesus is specifically charged with blasphemy, where he is struck and spat upon. Luke edits that out. You can see Luke is doing some real editing of the Passion narrative. Maybe he understands that his gospel is already very, very, very long. So then, eventually, Jesus is sent to Pontius Pilate. And let's read that. Let's read that, 23, 2 through 5. Lou, can you read that?
2 through 5.
Yeah, verses 2 through 5.
And they began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king." And Pilate asked him, "Are you king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "You have said so." Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, "I find no guilt in this man." But they were urgent, saying, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee even to this place."
Okay, now note carefully. Pilate asked Jesus this one question: "Are you the king of the Jews?" As if to say, "You sure as hell don't look like a king to me." You know, they've arrested you, and you're homeless. They arrested you on the Mount of Olives, and they have said you claim to be a king. You claim the Messiah is a king, of course, an anointed one. And Pilate says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus essentially gives a non-committal answer, which is to say, no. I mean, in other words, I'm not going to go along with your line of questioning, okay? You have said so. And after Jesus gives this non-committal answer, "You have said that I am," which is to say, I'm not saying that I am, but you have said it. Pontius then addresses, quote, the chief priests and the multitudes, saying, "I find no crime in this man." And they were urgent. He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, beginning from Galilee, even to this place. See, Luke knows that the beginning of Jesus' teaching was in Galilee. And then Pontius Pilate decides, hey, he's a Galilean. Herod's in town. I'm going to send him to Herod. As if to say, maybe I can wash my hands. Now, in Matthew, Pontius Pilate does wash his hands of this in Matthew. But anyway, he basically sends him to Herod for questioning. This passage, of course, is only found in Luke. What provokes that is that Jesus is described as a Galilean. And so Jesus is being sent to Herod, since Jesus was a Galilean. Herod was a Jewish puppet king in that area that included Galilee. So then Herod had desired to see Jesus. Luke 23:9 says, Herod questioned him at some length, but he made no answer. You know, when you don't have to testify against yourself, right? You don't, if people question you, you don't have to make any answer at all. And of course, that allows your questioners to assume that you're guilty or assume that you're innocent. But then, Herod, with his soldiers, treated Jesus with contempt and mocked him. It doesn't say that they started beating him up, but they mocked him and they arrayed him in gorgeous apparel, like a fancy cloak, you know, and he sent him back to Pilate. So then, 23:3-16. Fred, would you read that?
What verses?
3-16.
We read 3 a while ago.
I'm sorry. I believe I mean about 10-16.
Okay, 10.
Yeah.
And the chief priests and scribes stood and vehemently accused him. Then Herod with his men of war treated him with contempt and mocked him, arrayed him in a gorgeous robe, and sent him back to Pilate. That very day Pilate and Herod became friends with each other, for previously they had been enemies with each other. Then Pilate, when he had called together the chief priests, the rulers and the people, said to them, "You have brought this man to me as one who misleads the people. And indeed, having examined him in your presence, I have found no fault in this man concerning those things of which you accuse him. No, neither did Herod, for I sent you back to him, and indeed nothing deserving of death has been done of him. I will therefore chastise him and release him, for it was necessary for him to release one of them at the feast."
Right. And I believe that was verse 17, right? Is that last verse? Right. And that last verse doesn't necessarily appear in the earliest manuscripts, so there's a problem with the text of that verse. But nonetheless, Herod, by Pilate sending him to Herod, the puppet king, if Jesus is claiming to be a king, or it's being claimed that Jesus is a king, Herod is a king. And Herod doesn't find anything deserving of death, maybe a flogging or something, but he doesn't find any real major crime. And so, Pilate says, according to Roman law, there's no problem here, and according to the Jewish king who serves at the behest of the Roman emperor, there's nothing wrong. So why is it that you think that Jesus has done something terrible? So in 13 through 16, Jesus is declared innocent a second time by Pontius Pilate. Okay. Now then you have the Jesus or Barabbas. Bill, would you read that? Okay.
Now he was obliged to release one man to them at the festival. But they all cried out together, "Away with this man, and release to us Barabbas, a man who had been thrown into prison for an insurrection started in the city and for murder." Pilate addressed them once more, desiring to release Jesus. But they shouted out, "Crucify! Crucify him!" A third time he said to them, "Why? What evil has he done? I have found in him no crime deserving death. I will therefore chastise him and release him." But they were urgent, demanding with loud cries that he should be crucified. And their voices prevailed.
Okay. So, did you read all the way to 23? Yes, you did. Okay. So anyway, Barabbas is not exactly a choir boy, okay? He's a well-known person, a criminal who's been thrown into prison in 23:18 for an insurrection started in the city and for murder. So the crowd in Jerusalem at Passover prefers a murderer and an insurrectionist over Jesus, okay? So this does not cast the crowd in Jerusalem in a good light. So then he attempts again to release Jesus, whom he has twice proclaimed to be innocent. And the crowd in Jerusalem demands, in verse 23, they demanded with loud cries that he should be crucified, and their voices prevailed. So again, this is the Roman governor taking orders from the crowd. Ponder that for a while, okay? Then Pilate delivers Jesus to be crucified. Luke edits out that Jesus is clad in a purple robe, but previously he had been clad in gorgeous apparel, and that was done by Herod and his soldiers. And then Mark and Matthew, as well as John, have the crowning with the crown of thorns, which was done by the Roman soldiers, and Luke edits this out. So then the road to Golgotha, 23, 26 through 32. Simon the Cyrenian, he is Simona Tina Kyrenion, that's in the accusative case, a certain Simon of Cyrene, is seized to carry the cross behind Jesus. And this suggests that due to the severe flogging Jesus received, Jesus was too weak to carry the cross. It would be a leather whip with pieces of metal and bone on the ends. And this is confirmed also by Jesus' death on the cross after only 3 hours. But anyway, what happens? Well, if you look at chapter 23, verses 27 to 32, you will see what Jesus says. Verse verse 27 of chapter 23. And there followed him a great multitude of the people, and of women who bewailed and lamented him. But Jesus, turning to them, said, Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Don't weep for me, weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming when they will say, Blessed are the barren. Blessed are women who are sterile because they don't bear any children, right? The wombs that never bore and the breasts that never nursed. And then they will begin to say on the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills cover us. For if they do this when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry? What is this about? Well, I think that it's about the Jewish war. Jesus is portrayed as knowing that the Jewish war with the Romans is coming. And so the women of Jerusalem, note that it doesn't say all the Jewish women, but the women of Jerusalem are to weep not for Jesus, but for the Jewish population. The Jewish population of Jerusalem deserved lament because of the Jewish war in which the Romans will devastate Jerusalem and destroy the temple. That's the hardest date in the New Testament, is the destruction of the temple in 70. The Jewish war was between 66 and 70. So Jesus here is not asking for people to weep for himself. He's asking them to realize what is going to happen in the Jewish war. That's how I interpret this verse. And if you don't interpret it that way, I think it's even more difficult. Okay? Then Jesus is crucified. We've all heard about that in sermons. And then 23, 35 to 38. Who wants to read that? Would you read that?
Maria?
Please.
They divided his clothes among them by casting lots. The people stood looking on, and their rulers jeered at him. He saved others, now let him save himself, if this is God's Messiah, his chosen. The soldiers joined in the mockery and came forward, offering him their sour wine. If you are the king of the Jews, they said, save yourself. There was an inscription above his head which ran, This is the King of the Jews.
Okay. Human suffering brings out the worst in people. Have you noticed that? Ask the people in Afghanistan about that. The rulers, the Jewish rulers, are saying, he saved other people. If he really is the Messiah of God, the anointed one of God, the chosen one, why doesn't he save himself? And this, of course, is special ridicule for a person who was believed to have done healing miracles, including resurrected those who were dead, right? And the inscription over Jesus on the cross was a ridicule of the Jewish population, since it said, this is the King of the Jews. This is the people, the persons that Jews call a king, an anointed one. This is what he is like, and this is the fate that he's getting from the Roman authorities. Okay? Now, the two thieves, that's interesting. The two criminals who were crucified with Jesus also reviled him. Verse 39, are you not the Christ? Are you really the Messiah? Well, hell, save us. But the other rebuked him, saying, do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward of our deeds. Hell, he's a theologian, right? But this man has done nothing wrong. But he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And he said to him, truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. Luke, the two criminals in Mark, as well as Matthew, also revile Jesus. Luke seems to transform this into a blessing of the so-called good thief in this unique passage. The good thief was repentant for his thievery and even said that the condemnation of the two thieves was just. He also had faith in Jesus, since he asked, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And in that very difficult verse, truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. Many of us would like to know what that means. This is maybe the most difficult verse in the New Testament to interpret. There's a wonderful 3-volume commentary by Francois Beauvant, who was at the University of Lausanne, and then he was hired to be the professor of New Testament at Harvard to keep the peace. And he gave a marvelous history of interpretation of this verse. The term paradise seems to come from Persia, and it originally meant a garden or park where the king or another lord can rest or go hunting. The term was taken over in Jewish apocalyptic literature as in 1st Enoch. Beauvant opines this is his opinion. I think that Luke, as he had done with Lazarus in 19-31, the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, he locates the righteous in a place of happiness between their death and the final resurrection. Where is Lazarus after he died? He was carried by the angels to be in the bosom of Abraham. So it's a place of happiness between their physical death and the final resurrection of the dead. And so it's hard to disagree with the late Francois Beauvant, who was very, very, very nice. Then after that, you have the death of Jesus. And the death of Jesus is just about the final confirmation of the human nature of Jesus. Those who witnessed this crazy business, this deeply unjust mob lynching that the Romans went along with, they witnessed this spectacle. Seeing what had happened, they returned home beating their breasts. What does that mean? Well, it means that they've changed their minds. Evidently, they saw what the Roman governor and the soldiers of the Roman governor had done to Jesus. After the Roman governor has said twice, Jesus is innocent, then the crowds thought better of Jesus than they had done earlier, when in fact they demanded his execution by crucifixion. Perhaps this means that the Jewish crowds now realize what the Roman Empire really meant for the Jews, who were thought to somehow have opposed the brutal Roman occupation. When the Romans did decide to put anyone to death, boy, they really did it. Okay. Now, much has been written by not only biblical scholars, but everyone who is interested in the history of Christianity and the history of Judaism. Much has been written about the death of Jesus. And one of the things that you read, and that Gnilka, the book that I refer to at the bottom of this slide, his great book, Jesus of Nazareth, Message and History, he taught in Munich. And that's the best book of its kind, I think. The writers, editors, compilers, whatever, of the Gospels attempt to fix the blame for the death of Jesus on the Jewish leaders or on the Jewish people. This is why in Matthew 27:25, the Jewish people say, his blood be on us and on our children. Only Matthew has that. Of course, there were always conflicts between Jews, among Jews, within Judaism. But history and common sense shows most of us that it was the Roman governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate, who gave the order for the horrific execution of Jesus. The Jews couldn't put anyone to death. They may have wanted to, but they couldn't do it. It was the Roman governor who decided. Let's be clear about that. And I would really urge you to get a copy of Joachim Gnilka's book, Jesus of Nazareth, Message and History. It came out in 97, and the next to last chapter is the chapter on his execution, of Jesus' execution. And on the actual, he's very good in Roman law and in terms of what Roman law, was in effect, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're interested in the details of why Jesus was put to death according to Roman law, you will not find a better narrative about it than Gnilka's book. The witnesses of the crucifixion, including the people who were acquaintances of Jesus, or literally the people who knew Jesus, they stood at a distance and saw these things. They stood at a distance. They were not right up next to the cross. In the Gospel of John, it's the mother of Jesus and the beloved disciple, who is never identified in John, who are the witnesses and who stayed with Jesus as he was on the cross. But here in Luke, the witnesses of the crucifixion stood a ways away. Then Jesus was buried. You can't do a full burial because that's working on the Sabbath, and the Sabbath begins the eve as the sun is going down before the Sabbath day. And so they basically had to hurriedly bury Jesus to get his body off of the cross and out of sight and buried after a fashion before the Passover began. Mark 15:42 points out that it was the evening before the Sabbath, and Matthew and Luke edit that out. Luke 23 focuses on the righteousness of Joseph of Arimathea and his successful request to remove the body of Jesus. Pontius Pilate doesn't have a problem with that. Jesus' body was merely wrapped in a linen shroud, bloody as it was, and laid in a rock-hewn tomb. No one else had been interred there. And then Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Jesus, saw where Jesus was buried. In Mark and Matthew and Luke doesn't identify the women who witnessed his burial. Then there is the women at the empty tomb. Who wants to read that? Jennifer. 24:1 through 12.
But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they came to the tomb, bringing the spices which they had prepared. And they found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. And it happened that while they were perplexed about this, behold, two men suddenly stood near them in dazzling apparel. And as the women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground, the men said to them, "Why do you seek the living one among the dead? He is not here, but he is risen. Remember how he spoke to you while he was still in Galilee, saying that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and on the third day rise again." And they remembered his words, and they returned from the tomb and reported all these things to the 11 and to all the rest. Now they were Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, the mother of James. Also the other women with them were telling these things to the apostles. And these words appeared to them as nonsense, and they would not believe them. But Peter arose and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen wrappings only, and he went away to his home, marveling at that which had happened. And behold, two of them were going that very day to a village.
I'll let you stop there. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, the original empty tomb story is in Mark 16:1 through 8. And in Mark 16:1 through 8, you have the angel who appears and says, okay, he's not here, he's risen. You know why we say, hallelujah, Christ is risen, he's risen indeed. It comes from this. And then go to Galilee, and there you will see him. I've told you. So, verse 8 of Mark 16. And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had come upon them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. And the earliest and best manuscripts of Mark end there. Now, there are three other endings in Mark, but basically the big deal is in Mark 16:1 through 8, the women who go to the empty tomb don't know what to do or what to say. And now, in Luke, they actually go and tell the apostles. And the apostles don't believe it. But Peter, and this is unique to Luke, Peter actually goes to the tomb, he runs to the tomb. Verse 12, he runs to the tomb, and stopping and looking in, saw the linen cloths by themselves, and he went on wondering what had happened. So the empty tomb is an occasion not of triumph for the early church or even joy. They don't know what to make of it, which is to say, they're not expecting that Jesus is risen from the dead, even though they're being told it by one or two angels. See? So the early church, they don't expect it, and when told it by angels, they don't believe it. How about that? So then what happens? Well, then we have my favorite story in Luke. Denny, why don't you read this? 24, 13 to 35.
That very day, two of them were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What is this conversation which you're holding with each other as you walk?" And they stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that are happening there in these days?" And he said to them, "What things?" And they said to him, "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, he is now the third day since this has happened." Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning and did not find his body. And they came back saying that they had even seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see. And he said to them, "O foolish men, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them all the scriptures, the things concerning himself. So they drew near to the village to where they were going. He appeared to be going further, but they constrained him, saying, "Stay with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is now far spent." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took the bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished out of their sight. Then they said to each other, "Did not our hearts burn with us while he talked to us on the road, while he opened to us the scriptures?" And they rose that same hour and returned to Jerusalem. And they found the 11 gathered together, and those who were with them, who said, "The Lord has risen indeed, and has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road, and how he was known to them in the breaking of the bread.
All right. If you want to know if your Bible maps are fully honest with you, look for Emmaus on the Bible map, and if you see a question mark by Emmaus, you'll know that the Bible map is honest. Because Emmaus has never been found. And there is a variant reading. The text of Luke says that it was 60 stadia from Jerusalem, around 7 miles. And so if you look for a place archaeologically, 60 stadia, which is around 7 miles from Jerusalem, there was a city, I believe it's been referred to as Amwas. Some people think that was Emmaus, but others don't. So it's really a big question. I mean, when you dig a city up, you first have to figure out how old is this city. And before about the 3rd or 4th, 5th centuries CE, you really are not going to be that sure. But anyway, it hasn't been found. The risen Jesus appears to the disciples on the road, and he is teaching the church how to understand the scriptures. And he begins with the Bible. And the scriptures includes the Old Testament strictly. And he begins with Moses, i.e. the Torah, and all the prophets. See, doesn't mention the writings, but the Torah and the prophets. And then they say to Jesus, well, we got to our place, but it's really late. And by the way, some of you know the hymn, Abide with us, abide with me, fast falls the eventide. Your Baptist friends think that's a funeral hymn. But if you're a good Anglican, you know that's an evening hymn. Fast falls the eventide. It's a traditional English evening hymn. And so then Jesus took the bread. By the way, what are the 4 actions of the Eucharist, according to Don Gregory Dix? He took the bread, he blessed the bread, meaning he gave thanks for the bread, he broke the bread, and then he shared it with Cleopas and the unnamed disciple. That's the 4 things that we do at the Eucharist. I take the bread, i.e. the offertory. I bless the bread, i.e. the Eucharistic prayer. I break the bread, the breaking of the bread, and then we have communion together. Take, bless, break, share. So even though this is not a Eucharist, it certainly has elements that remind one of a Eucharist. And so instead of the Eucharist being associated in the final analysis perhaps with the Lord, with the Last Supper, it may be that Luke wants to associate the Eucharist with the appearance of the risen Christ. How about that?
Who was on the road? Who are the 2 people on the road?
Cleopas and somebody else.
Are they women or men?
Well, I think it would most likely be men on the road.
Okay. They just referred the women of our party who had gone to the tomb, so it made me think that maybe they were women.
I don't see that, but
Okay.
it's possible. We're not told who the second one is.
Okay.
But a man and a woman traveling together, they're both adults, they should be married.
Okay.
We're talking people who are practicing Jews.
Okay. All right.
All right. And then after that,
So Cleopas goes back to Jerusalem.
yes, and said, hey,
We've
seen the risen Lord. And
Okay.
they say, okay, we have to. You know?
And they were talking about it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So then after that, Jesus appears to his disciples. This is the definitive appearance of Jesus to the disciples in 24:36 and following. The emphasis is on the resurrected body of Jesus, but the resurrected body of Jesus still shows the wounds that he suffered during his passion and death. It also shows Jesus requesting and eating a piece of broiled fish that shows that Jesus did have actually a human body which could feel hunger and eat food. In other words, the resurrected Jesus was not a disembodied spirit. That became a big issue in the 2nd century when the Gnostics, full-blown Gnostics, were really very active. And then in 24:31, the disciples were still disbelieved for joy and wonder. They weren't sure what to believe. And that also reminds us of Matthew 28. They believed, and it's been translated, but some doubted. But I would translate it, but they doubted. So you can believe and doubt at the same time, I guess. So in other words, the writer of Luke and the writer of Matthew is trying to say they saw the risen Christ, they heard the risen Christ, and they still were not 100% convinced. I think that's what it means. And then finally, you have the ending of Luke, a final resurrection appearance in 24:36 and following goes to show that the risen Jesus, he told the apostles how to understand and interpret the Scriptures. The Scriptures being spoken of here are only and exactly the law and the prophets and perhaps the Psalms. By the way, in Judaism, the Old Testament is the law, the prophets, and the writings. Guess what the first book of the writings is? The Psalms. See? So, Jesus says this in 24:44, "These are my words which I spoke to you while I was still with you." In other words, what I'm telling you now is what I told you previously. This is not a change. that everything written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms must be fulfilled. Then he goes on to say, he opened their minds to understand the scriptures and said to them, thus it is written that the Messiah should suffer and on the third day rise from the dead. And so you're not going to exactly find that in the Old Testament unless you think that the suffering servant in the second Isaiah is the Messiah, which Isaiah doesn't say. But nonetheless, this is the way that apparently Jesus read the Old Testament and the way that early Jesus followers read the Old Testament. The Messiah, it was necessary for the Messiah to suffer and on the third day rise from the dead. And then Jesus departs via his ascension into heaven. So that's all I've got to say, and our next class will start on September 19th. And we have a couple of minutes. We have a couple of minutes for questions or angry rebuttals or comments, please.
My Bible has twice I saw that there were verses that weren't in my text, but they were in the footnotes.
Right.
The second one of those was Luke 24. 12.
Yes.
24:12. And
Right.
but Peter rose and ran to the tomb, stooping and looking in. He saw the linen cloth by themselves, and he went home wondering what had happened.
And so what happened with that is, when you look in the Greek New Testament, such as the Nestle Allen edition or the United Bible Society's edition, or any critical edition, it will have little sigla or marks in the text, and then it refers you to the apparatus criticus. That's what we call that in graduate school, the apparatus criticus. And in the apparatus criticus, where it means the manuscripts don't agree with each other, and the reading that is what they believe to be the correct reading is what ends up in the text, in the lemma. And they will give you the variant readings. That's called a varialectio. And the variant reading is the one that they think is not the original reading. And so they give you the evidence, the manuscript and the versional evidence for the readings that they adopt, and the reading they adopt, and the reading or readings that they reject. So that's the beauty of a critical text, is that at the bottom of the page, in the apparatus criticus, you can see which manuscripts and which versions and which fathers of the church support what reading. And so the King James Version, they had less than 50 manuscripts, and none of them were probably before the 10th century. And now we have several manuscripts that go back to the 4th century, and then we have some papyrus manuscripts that go back into the late 2nd century. So we have a better understanding of the manuscript tradition because we have more manuscripts, and Anglicans like Westcott and Hort at Cambridge, were able to put together their Greek New Testament. And when they put together their Greek New Testament, which they call the New Testament in the original Greek in the 1880s, that was the Greek that underlay the revised version in the 1880s. And then the revised version, there was an American variant called the American Standard Version, which was very wooden. And then the RSV was an American retranslation using the better manuscripts by American scholars in 1946. And that's what caught on. So it's a matter of when the manuscripts don't agree, you have to decide which reading is the correct reading. When we do that, that's called text criticism or textual criticism.
Which
Yes.
book says, "Do not touch me, for I have not yet risen"?
John.
John, okay. And
He's
then
saying that to Mary Magdalene.
Oh, okay.
To answer one of Luke's questions about who it was, it says in verse 34, the Lord has really risen and has appeared to Simon. So that makes me think that Simon must be one of the people on the road to Emmaus. Because that how you interpret it?
I've never interpreted it that way, but I think if you read 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 8, you realize that there is a massive tradition of resurrection appearances to the disciples. He appeared to the 12, he appeared to James, the brother of the Lord. He appeared to more than 500 believers at one time, of which most are still alive. And then, as to an abortion, one untimely born, he appeared also to me. So I think there were multiple resurrection appearances, which makes sense because they were apparently multiple resurrection stories. In other words, when you have resurrection appearances, then people who saw it craft stories so that they can teach people, fellow Christians, about the resurrection of Jesus. So that could be the case. That could be the case. In the case of resurrection appearances, if you believe Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, there was a bunch of them. A bunch of them. Any other questions?
It's very interesting. And my map does have a question mark on it.
It should. It should.
So the walk to Emmaus, is that in other books of the Bible as well?
It's
That's
never
only
been
Luke?
found archaeologically.
If that's only referred to in the book of Luke?
It's only referred to in antiquity in Luke.
Okay, thank you.
That's,
It's never been found otherwise.
the walk to Emmaus is the Methodists, that's their analogous to,
Cursive.
analogous to Cursive.
Right. Right.
Well, it's to an unknown place,
Right.
an undocumented place.
Well, anyway, there you have it, and this will be Gospel of Luke 10, and we are going to see what we can do. It may be that the second part of Luke session 9 is on that
We gotta let
camera,
this go.
but we couldn't find it, so I may just have to re-record it to an empty parish hall or something. But I think I hope very much that it's useful to our parishioners and anybody else who wants to study Luke, and they can read it. The important thing is not what I say. When you read something about Luke, we call that secondary literature. And what you really need to do is read a translation or the original text of Luke. And then when you do that, that's what it means to read Luke. Don't read, you can read what I say and you can agree or disagree, but the important thing is to read the text. Or a translation of it, a good, solid translation of the text. And to think about what it means to you as an educated person, as a thinking person, and indeed as a Christian. And I think there is much, much, much to chew on in the Gospel according to Luke.